The Stoics used religious imagery and conceptions in their philosophy. And there's some tendencies that we have as modern readers that will lead us astray if we're not careful about them in understanding what Epictetus, for example, means by God and how God is connected with the world, with human beings, and how human beings are connected with each other. So one of those tendencies, which is not that big of a problem, is thinking that by Zeus he just means what all the other Greeks meant by Zeus, the king of the gods, up in Olympus somewhere, some guy with a white beard and all that. And the Stoics didn't really have that conception of Zeus. When they're talking about Zeus, they mean something more like a cosmic principle that governs and rules everything, that enjoys the highest beatitude. And so now we're sort of steering over to the other conception, which is a bit more dangerous to import to these texts. And that is to understand Epictetus and the other Stoics talking about God as meaning something very similar to what, say, Jews or Christians or Muslims mean when they talk about God. This transcendent deity who's in some way outside of and prior to the entire universe or the cosmos. As a matter of fact, this universe world, let's also use this term, the actual Greek term that they would use, cosmos. The Stoic God is a cosmic God in that the God that they have in mind, it pervades the entire universe in some way, but is not outside the universe. As a matter of fact, the Stoics were materialists, so they actually think that God is in some way material. And there's very tricky explanations about just how that's going to be. You're not going to find them in Epictetus because he wasn't concerned with the Stoic theology in that extent. He was more concerned with the ethics. But you can find them in other Stoic texts. Now, if you think of, Yahweh or the Christian Trinity or Allah or something like that, and these are all, I understand, names for, perhaps the same thing. I don't want to worry about that sort of thing. If you think about that when you're seeing Epictetus talk about God, you're gonna get a bit mistaken about it, because those conceptions, those monotheistic conceptions, place God as active within the universe, as providentially ordering things, but as also, in a certain respect, outside of and greater than and transcendent to the universe. The Stoics don't have that conception of God. So you don't want to make that mistake. And if you dislike the monotheistic conception of God, if you're, say an atheist or an agnostic steering towards atheism, don't throw the Stoics in that same bag. Look and see just what he's doing with this conception of God. So let's follow through this. One chapter that we want to begin with is actually chapter 12 of book 1. He's going through a bunch of notions about God and the gods. He says, with respect to gods, and he's canvassing the ancient Greek ideas about it. There are some who say that there is no God. The divine being does not exist. Others say that it exists, but it is inactive and careless and takes no forethought about anything. There is something divine, but it really doesn't do anything connected with the universe. A third class say that a being exists and exercises forethought, but only about great things and heavenly things, about nothing on the earth, just about the heavens, the cosmic processes, but not about human beings, not about little animals and plants. A fourth class say that a divine being exercises forethought both about things on the earth and heavenly things, but in a general way only. Sort of like a plan that has outlines. Rome will rise. Who actually is going to be running it? We'll leave that up. We'll figure those details out when we get to it. That would be that conception. And there you have providence in a way, but it's just sort of like the general ideas of it. Sort of like when you have a strategic plan and it comes down to you and your boss says, all right, what are you going to do to implement this strategic plan, right? And then a fifth class says, I move not without thy knowledge. And he includes Odysseus, Ulysses, and Socrates in that class. And these are people who are saying to God, they're addressing God. Notice they have a personal relationship going on here. they are convinced that God actually cares about them and about the rest of the universe in a personal, individual way. Now, that's a very strong notion of what traditionally we call providence. And that's a term that you're going to see Epictetus using a lot in here. So we should turn now to the chapter on providence. But before we do that, there is one other thing. He says, before all other things, it's necessary to inquire about each of these opinions. And he runs through them. I'm not actually going to run through them here, but he says, one thing that you do want to be able to do is learn to wish that everything may happen as it does. How do things happen? As the disposer has disposed them. He's appointed summer and winter, abundance and scarcity, virtue and vice, and all such opposites for the harmony of the whole. So the idea is that this world, this cosmos, this universe, is actually a harmonious whole. If you could actually see the whole big picture, then a lot of the things that we consider to be bad, like, earthquakes, for example. Earthquakes are horrible. If you're caught in them, they're scary. Things are falling down. Just imagine what it must have been like before they actually understood earthquakes. They saw them as the gods being angry with them. Imagine if the earthquake then has a volcano coming up. That would really be scary, wouldn't it? The idea that Epictetus is bringing across, and this is a classic Stoic conception, is that if you could actually see the whole big picture, even though there are parts in it that are ugly, that appear disharmonious, it all forms one harmonious whole. So we want to be able to adapt ourselves to how things turn out, the providential order. And you notice I put 3 words here. You could talk about it in terms of order, like giving order to everything, like summer and winter he talks about, or structure. But I like the word story. And the reason I like the word story is because there's not only the element of time or structure and stuff like that. This is how time is organized. If providence really is there in all these things, then we're not in a story told by an idiot signifying nothing, according to the famous Shakespeare quote. We're in a coherent story where we all have our parts. Very often they're bit parts, but our parts do all matter to the general framework or the general narrative. So let's look now at that section specifically on providence. This is a little bit earlier in chapter 9. He says, from everything which is or happens in the world, it's easy to praise providence if a person possesses 2 qualities. If you don't have these qualities, it's not going to be easy to praise providence. One is the faculty of seeing what belongs and happens to all persons and things. So in being able to take a broader perspective. And the other is a grateful disposition. If you don't possess these 2 qualities, one person will not see the use of the things which are and which happen. If you can't actually see this, at least the beginnings of this structure, you're not going to actually have any good sense that there's some meaning to this, that there's some point to this. And you'll say, I don't like this. This is bad. And you'll be unhappy as a result. But notice that he says you have to go a little bit further than that. He talks about a grateful disposition. Another will not be thankful for them, even if he does know them. Let me give some examples. If God had made color but had not made the faculty of seeing them, what would have been their use? None at all. If he'd made the faculty of vision but didn't make objects to fall under their faculty, again, what good would that be? And this gives you part of the vision of what he's talking about with providence. This entire world that exists, this cosmos, this order, things are oriented towards each other. We have a faculty of sight. There are things that we can see. That we could say this about all sorts of other things. We like to eat things, I know I do, and digest them, because if I don't, I'll die. And fortunately, there's all sorts of nice, tasty things that we can eat and digest. in part because we live in a human society. We're going to get to talk about the function of society in a moment. So he says, it's from the very structure of things which have attained their completion that we're accustomed to show that a work is the act of some artificer, a worker, and has not been constructed without a purpose. So does each of these things demonstrate the workman, and do not visible things and the faculty of seeing and light demonstrate God and providence? What about the existence of male and female, and the desire of each for, as he puts it, conjunction? That means having sex, right? Dating, hooking up, whatever you want to call it, right? That demonstrates this providential ordering. I mean, if you think about this, and I'm not going to go into any great details on this because I don't want to get too crude, but just think about sexual relations and how weird, if you sort of step back from it and look at anatomy and you look at what we do with it and how things are set up to culminate in reproduction, although much of the time, it doesn't. Even to just produce pleasure. If you back off from it and you look at these things with an unvarnished eye, you're like, wow, this is just bizarre. And yet that's the way that things are for human beings and for the rest of the animals. Plants. Think about flowers. We give flowers to each other. Here, have a bouquet. I like you. What we're doing is we're actually giving the sexual organs of plants to each other, because that's how plants came about with reproducing, and they're connected with this whole other sequence. Think about pollinators, bees, hummingbirds, butterflies. They fly from flower to flower, and why do they go to this one instead of this one? Well, because of the nectar, and because of the pollen, and because of the colors of them. As a matter of fact, in flowers there are even colors that we cannot see with our eyes, but bees and butterflies can see in the infrared spectrum and the ultraviolet spectrum. Isn't that amazing to think about? So if Epictetus were around today, he probably would be even more struck by these sorts of concepts. He says, we can move from all these sorts of orders and conjunctions that we see in the universe, and we can, say that there's some sort of providence ordering them. So he says, let's move on to something else. He says, what then are these things done in us only? Now we're talking about human nature, human beings. Many indeed, in us only, of which the rational animal had particular need, but you will find in common to us with irrational animals. Are they the same thing? Again, let's think about sexuality. Is sexuality the same thing in dogs or even in apes? Apes are very close to us, as it is in human beings. Well, if it was, then there wouldn't be a massive industry out there selling all sorts of things to make people more attractive or help them deal with their problems, or figure out how to actually conjoin, how to find mates. Dogs don't need that sort of thing. They just wait until things take their course. As a matter of fact, we are able to, because we're rational animals, we bring this element of being able to do things in very different, more complex, more voluntary ways than the other animals do. And we could think that way about cuisine as well. Everybody eats, and actually some animals even do a little bit of food processing, but we're the ones who actually do the bulk of modifying foods. We've changed the whole fabric of the world through agriculture and herding. We've even used the other animals to do that. So these are all good examples. Now, he says, use is one thing, understanding is another. What does he mean by that? Animals, they actually sense the environment and they react to it. A dog sees a deer, it goes and barks at it because it might be saying to it, hey, come and play with me, or it might be saying, hey, come here because I'd like to eat you. But that's about it. And I'm not knocking dogs and pets and cats. I'm a cat-dog person myself. I love animals. I even love spiders. But they're not the same thing as human beings. Human beings not only have appearances from external impressions from the outside world, we're able to reflect upon them. We're able to interpret them in novel ways. And he's going to go on and he's going to say, where the constitutions, where the natures of living beings are different, there are also the acts and the ends are different. In those animals whose constitution is adapted only to use by us, that's the Stoic conception, use alone is enough. But an animal that also has the power of understanding the use, unless there be due exercise of the understanding, he will never attain his proper end. Now that's something interesting to think about as well. The providential order gives plants and animals pretty much all they need in order to realize a full animal or plant human life, because they do a lot of cool stuff, but it's not as sophisticated as us. Because we have this capacity for understanding, unless we develop that, unless we develop our rational part, our ruling part, our moral faculty, we will not attain our end. We will not attain our purpose. Here's where it gets really interesting. So as human beings, we have a capacity to be involved in the providential order in a way different than the other animals, by using our minds, by choosing, by volitionally engaging, voluntarily engaging in the providential order. So he says God has introduced human beings to be a spectator of God and God's works. And not only a spectator of them, here's where it goes beyond, but an interpreter. We're supposed to be engaging in things. And then he says, for this reason it's shameful to begin and end where irrational animals do. But rather we ought to begin where they begin and end where nature ends in us. And nature ends in contemplation and understanding in a way conformable to nature. Take care then not to die without having been spectators of these things. So he's telling us that we're meant for higher things. This is a good point to move to Book 2, Chapter 5, which we've already looked at before. Here, he's talking about, again, the nature of the good in the rational animal. And he says, well, plants and animals are works of God, right? But they're not superior beings. They're not parts of the gods. But you are a superior thing. You are a portion of God. That's why on this diagram, you notice I've got like lowercase God here for the human being. Epictetus literally thinks, as the Stoics do, that there is a portion of God within each one of us. And that portion is our rational faculty, our capacity to choose. That is God. That is the divine. If you don't like the word God, just say the divine, the transcendent, whatever is highest. There's something of that in us. And so, what are the consequences of that? Well, that introduces a certain level of responsibility, doesn't it? He says, you are a portion separated from the deity. You have in yourself a certain portion of him. Why then are you ignorant of your noble descent? Why don't you know whence you came? Why then will you not remember when you are eating who you are, who eat, and whom you feed? So, what would be an upshot of that? What, are you going to turn God into a glutton? Just keep stuffing your face full? God is concerned primarily with the belly and the mouth? This could go equal opportunity, right? He's talking to young men, so he's saying, when you are in conjunction with a woman, will you not remember who you are, who do this thing? But we could say this equally of women. When you're in conjunction, that means, as my grandfather used to euphemize sexual relations, when you're entangled with somebody else, what are you doing? You're taking a bit of God and having God doing that thing. So he says, you carry within yourself, and you perceive not that you are polluting God by impure thoughts and dirty deeds. If an image of God were present, you would not dare to do any of the things which you're doing. But when God himself is present within and sees and hears all, you're not ashamed of thinking such things and doing such things. Why? Because you're ignorant of your own nature and subject to the wrath of God. So he talks about, when we make statues or we make other things, Think about robots, for example. We make robots. They're still not at the level of human beings. The works of God have the power of motion. They breathe. They have the faculty of using the appearance of things and the power of examining them. Being the work of such an artist, don't you have responsibilities, he's saying. Not only, what shall I say, not only that he made you, but also entrusted you to yourself and made you a deposit to yourself. Epictetus is saying that every one of us has freedom about what we do with this portion of God within us. Now, here's where it's going to get even more interesting. We've been doing a lot of God talk so far. Now let's sort of skim off this part, right, for the time being, and let's just focus on human beings in relation to each other. What does he have to say about that? Well, there's two portions of the text, two chapters. One is on friendship, and one is about solitude, where he tells us some really interesting and useful things about this. So let's actually look, we'll start with the one on solitude. What is it to be solitary? It means to be on your own. Many people find this incredibly difficult to deal with. They can't stand solitude, being on their own without other people. Why is that? He says, if being alone is enough to make solitude, you may say that even Zeus is solitary and bewails himself, saying, "Unhappy that I am, who have neither Hera nor Athena nor Apollo, nor brother nor son nor descendant nor kinsman." That is what some say that he does when he's alone at the conflagration. The conflagration is this sort of end of time and beginning of time for the Stoics. They don't understand how a man passes his life when he's alone, because they set out from a certain natural principle. And he's not saying that this isn't the case, but he's saying that this isn't all the case. The natural desire of community and mutual love, and from the pleasure of conversation among people. Don't you have times where you want to hang out with somebody? Where you don't want to be alone? Where you enjoy being with other people? You know, unless you're a total recluse, and even recluses watch TV or listen to the radio or read books quite often, or even have a little pet. You enjoy other people. It says, nonetheless, a person ought to be prepared in a manner for this also, to be able to be sufficient to oneself and to be one's own companion. To be able to handle solitude requires that you're okay with who you are. Not just that you tell yourself that you're okay with who you are. Not just that you have a good facade for other people, but that you're actually a good companion to yourself. That's why some people can't stand to be alone. We do have this natural impulse that ties us to other people. That's good. That's nothing wrong with that. But we also need alone time, as we put it. He says, we ought to be able to talk with ourselves, not to feel the want of others also, not to be unprovided with the means of passing our time, to observe the divine administration and the relation of ourselves to everything else. If you can see yourself as being part of this whole cosmos, this whole universe, then being on your own is really, in some respects, not actually being on your own. You're not alone, because you've got yourself, and you have the whole universe and God that you're connected with. So, let's move on from solitude to his discussion of friendship now. So he says, what we're talking about in terms of friendship is any sort of relation or association that we have. He's got, examples of family members, a father to a child, friends with each other, country people, to members of the same community to each other. And he says, if we want to think about friendship, and we want to think about the nature of human beings, how is that going to take place? And here we're actually talking about society. How is it that human beings are able to associate with each other in communities? Well, if we are merely at the level of the animal, it's not very pretty and it's not very pleasant. We might be able to peacefully associate for a while, but sooner or later we're going to have a clash. Like he says, he's got a great example here. He says, Do you sometimes think people to be good, at another time bad? Have you not had a friendly feeling towards them, and another time the feeling of an enemy? Do you not at one time praise them, and another time blame them? Has somebody been deceived about who's their friend? That doesn't always happen. He says, but he selected this man as his friend and is of a changeable disposition. Does he have goodwill towards him? No, he doesn't. What about a person who now abuses a person, yells at them, and then afterwards admires them? Isn't that how a lot of people behave towards each other? Think about celebrity. Think about social media. Think about our ways of relating to other people and going in and going out in the workplace, sometimes in circles of friends, teams, all sorts of things like that. He says, do you not think that Epictetus did not love his own child when he was little? That he was not in agony when the child had a fever? But then, when the test came, he was in conflict with them. Weren't Eteocles and Polynices from the same mother and the same father? Weren't they brothers? And yet you get this battle between them where they say, I'm going to kill you. And the other guy says, I had the same idea. Why does this happen? He says, if a person puts in the same place his interest, sanctity, holiness, that means goodness and country, and parents and friends, all these are secured. So if you actually have a consistent, sort of integrated worldview that connects your values together, then you're not going to find them played off against each other. But if he puts in one place his interest, in another his friends, in his country and his kinsmen and justice itself, all these give way to being borne down by the weight of interest. For where the eye and the mind are placed to that place of necessity, the animal inclines. He says, if in the flesh, there's the ruling power. If in the will, it's there. And if it is in externals, it's there. So remember, we've already gone over this quite a bit. If we're placing our values, our priorities, our preferences in terms of the body, in terms of our possessions, in terms of external things, sooner or later, we're going to find ourselves in the kind of conflicts that are going to keep us from actually being able to be friends with other people, to be in association with them. We may, in fact, team up with other people against other people in competition, but that's not really the sort of thing that the Stoics are looking for. If, on the other hand, we identify ourselves primarily with this highest part of ourselves, with the ruling part, with reason, with our faculty of will, which is a piece of God, then we're actually able to approach others in the right frame of mind, and we can have genuine relationships that will last when they're placed under stress. Now, that doesn't mean that if we do that with another person that they're necessarily going to do that with us, because it's up to them what they do with this part of themselves. It's not up to us. We can't force them. We can't incentivize them. We can't seduce them or cajole them into doing that. Only they can make that choice for themselves. But a genuine friendship is possible between people of goodwill like that. What do you do about the other people who are not of goodwill? Epictetus says you should feel sorry for them. Instead of getting angry with them, instead of looking at them as being enemies to you, you should understand that if their ruling part is messed up, if they've taken the bit of God inside of them, and put it outside of harmony with the rest of the universe, it's certainly, first of all, don't take it personal, because it's not about you. They're out of accord with the whole universe. They're not just out of accord with you. But they're also out of accord with you because they don't know any better. And you can try to guide them. You can try to give them information. You can try to, do good, nice things for them. But you can't make them be different than they are. They are also part of the providential order. So being able to say yes to the way things are means saying yes to living in society with people who are a mixture of good and bad, a mixture of virtuous and vicious. And they're a mixture in part because they haven't gotten their ruling faculty, they haven't gotten, what's most human and what's most divine in them sorted out. The last thing that I'll close with is that Epictetus, over and over again, you're going to see this in the discourses, when he's giving that sort of counsel about how to treat other people who might not be, the best friend, the best mother, the best father, best brother, he gives you two things, two cautions. One is he says, well, what about you? Are you totally squared away? Is this totally rational in you? Or do you still have some work to do? Because if you're going to criticize this guy over here, you might want to look at yourself. And that might actually make you feel a little bit less superior to this guy over here and make it a little bit easier for you to put up with their nonsense. So that's one thing. It's about cultivating compassion on the basis of an understanding of ourselves. The other thing that he does say is that we do want to try to cultivate this part of ourselves as much as possible so that we can have the right orientation ourselves towards the other.